Hi, I'm Ann Parker. I'm a past national president. I'm going to speak with you today about the affiliation agreement. It is between the corporation, the National Executive Board, and each department, each chapter, and each organization, auxiliary. It is a statement of our relationship. As you will recall, the Blue Star Mothers of America is a congressional chartered organization for the purpose of supporting America's military, veterans, and their families. Its members are mothers of men and women who are serving, who have served in the United States Armed Forces. Every member of the corporation is a stakeholder in the corporation. This agreement is for the benefit of all members to ensure that all levels of the corporation work together effectively and efficiently. National department chapters and organization auxiliaries are part of a diverse yet interdependent organization. This document represents the commitment of all levels of the corporation to approach challenges in a unified and mutually supportive manner, mindful of each other's roles and respective of each other's strengths. Each level of the corporation has responsibility for achieving each component of our mission to support, and patriotism must be held accountable to the members for fulfilling these responsibilities. First, a few definitions. National shall be the corporation, which is the congressionally chartered nonprofit corporation based out of Washington, D.C., where our corporation is chartered, and with chapters all through the nation. The executive board at the national level is the National Executive Board, which is charged with carrying out the corporation functions between conventions. Department shall mean the entity based in the state that is charged with carrying out the corporation's mission at the state level by working with local chapters located within its jurisdiction if such an entity exists. Chapter means the entity charged with carrying out the corporation's mission at the local level within a geographical area as defined by their charter. Auxiliary shall mean the subgroup charged with carrying out the corporation's mission. Binding arbitration shall mean the hearing and determination of a case in controversy by a person known as an arbitrator, chosen by the national department, chapter, auxiliary, member, or associate, with the resulting decision by the arbitrator being final with no controversy. Intellectual property shall mean any and all intangible assets that consist of human knowledge and ideas that belong to the corporation, the use of which is overseen by our national organization. For example, things like trademarks, patents, logos, project names, programs. Representation of the parties. National represents and warrants the corporation validly existing and duly organized under the laws of the District of Columbia. Each party represents and warrants that each has the authority to enter into this agreement, and each is not a party to any other agreement which prohibits them from entering into this agreement or which may render provisions of this agreement ineffective and enforceable. The agreement is not and shall not be construed to conflict with the congressional charter or with the corporation's governing document. Now, National agrees to provide fair and impartial leadership for the entire corporation. National agrees to the extent reasonably practical, it shall facilitate and support department, chapter, and auxiliary activities consistent with the goals and missions of the corporation. National shall provide guidance, instruction, training to departments, chapters, and auxiliaries with respect to such things as accounting procedures, financial reporting requirements, the management infrastructure of departments, chapters, and auxiliaries, as well as communications infrastructure of the corporation. This includes providing departments, chapters, and auxiliary with the access to the congressional charter, the governing documents, national convention minutes, the national financial policy, all guidelines prepared by National regarding any corporation programs, and any other written policies adopted by the NEB through the use of modern technology, programs, or systems to include website and information related to necessary filing documents for the IRS, the 990, should be filed by December 1 each fiscal year. No single chapter or department shall be given preferential treatment. This may require that a department, chapter, auxiliary, or individual may have to put forth a personal effort to work with the chapter or fellow member who doesn't have access to such technology used to distribute and disperse information and training materials. National shall provide a free link on the corporation's website to departments, chapters, and auxiliaries, as well as provide access to the corporation's online communication group. National shall provide a digital newsletter that's available to all members. Finally, National shall also provide all members with current contact information for national officers and committee chairs. As more specifically delegated below, National grants to departments, chapters, and auxiliaries a non exclusive right to use the trademarks, service marks, logotypes, and other symbols of National, as well as copyrighted material owned by National. Fees must be paid in accordance with the corporation's code of conduct. Provided that departments, chapters, and auxiliaries are each in compliance with this agreement and with applicable provisions of the Internal Revenue Code, during the term of this agreement, departments, chapters, and auxiliaries are entitled to use the group exemption obtained by National from the IRS. Any violation by a department of this provision shall not affect a chapter's ability to use the National's exemption. Likewise, a violation by a chapter shall affect only the chapter's ability to utilize National's group exemption, and a violation by the auxiliary shall similarly be held. National agrees to consistently select a broad range of inputs from each level of the organization, departments, chapters, and members regarding all matters regarding the corporation and general membership. Now let's talk about the departments. A department agrees to promote the corporation's mission within its area. It must comply with the governing documents and all other policies or guidelines. A department agrees to provide National and the chapters within its jurisdiction of current contact information for all department officials, including a current mailing address for all corporation correspondence directed to the departments. A department agrees to provide National every chapter and auxiliary within to its chart any from the policies and systems. No single chapter, auxiliary, or individual shall be given preferential treatment. This may require that a department, chapter, auxiliary, or individual may have to put forth a personal effort to work with a chapter or fellow member who doesn't have the access to technology utilized to distribute and disperse information and training materials. The department agrees to prepare and file all required state registration statements and filings for the state it operates to ensure its status as an affiliated IRC group tax exemption, Internal Revenue Code. Each state has its own submission timelines and deadlines, which are outlined by the state's Attorney General's office or other state agencies. It is the responsibility of the department to identify what filings must be completed along with filing deadlines in accordance with the department's status with the Internal Revenue Code. The department may not participate in or contribute to any political campaign, nor engage in any activities that support or oppose a candidate for public office. The department must operate in the same fiscal year of September 1 through August 31st. Each year, for compliance, the National requires that the department submit its information by December 1st. This information will include a new officer roster with an updated affiliation agreement signature page, corporate annual report, the employer identification report, financial reports such as profit and loss, balance sheets, copies of all fiscal year-end bank statements for all accounts, and bank sign verification. Proof of internal revenue filing or a copy of the tax exemption filed with proof of filing at a date approved by the National 4th VP. Proof of state filings required for nonprofits if applicable, and receipt for payment of the annual VAVS fund obligation. Updated department information for the National website. The parties shall agree that upon disbandment of a department, after settlement of all liabilities, everything should be transferred to National and the final and necessary federal state paperwork filed in accordance with the Internal Revenue closing out the department. Now, what do the chapters agree to? They agree to promote the corporation's mission within their area as defined in their charter. A chapter must comply with the governing documents and all other policies and guidelines as directed by the National Executive Board, which includes the National Financial Policy. Chapters agree to provide national department, if applicable, with current contact information, including a current mailing address for all chapter correspondence. A chapter agrees to provide each member and associate with access to the following documents: the chapter's charter and standing rules, if there are any, department's charter and standing rules, if any, the governing documents, and all correspondence from the National Executive Board, so that all members and associates can be active and informed participants in the corporation. With the exception of Michigan 33, a chapter agrees to prepare and file all required state registration statements and filings for the state in which it operates to ensure its continuous status as an affiliation organization under the National Internal Revenue Code group exemption. Now, each state has its own submission timelines and deadlines, which are outlined by the state attorney general's office or any other state agencies. It's the responsibility of the chapter to identify what filings must be completed along with those deadlines. In accordance with the chapter status in the IRC, Internal Revenue Code tax exempt organization, the chapter may not participate in or contribute to any political campaign, nor may it engage in any activities that support or oppose a candidate for office. A chapter must operate on that same fiscal year, which is September 1 to August 31st. Each year, for compliance, the National requires that a chapter submit the following by December 1: new officer roster with updated affiliation agreement, corporation annual report, employer identification number report, financial reports to include profit and loss statement, balance sheet, copies of all fiscal year-end bank statements for all accounts, and a bank signer verification. Proof of IRS filing or a copy of the tax exemption filed with proof of filing at a date approved by the National 4th VP. Proof of state filings required for nonprofits, if applicable, receipt for payment of the annual VAVS fund obligation, and updated chapter information for the national website. The parties agree that if the chapter disbands, all assets after settlement of chapter liabilities shall be transferred to the department if such an entity exists. If it does not exist, those assets are transferred to the national organization. The chapter must file their final 990 with the Internal Revenue State and any state required documents to close out the chapter. Now, what does the auxiliary agree to? It agrees to promote the corporation's mission within its area of responsibility. An auxiliary agrees to comply with the governing documents and any other policies or guidelines as directed by the National Executive Board, such as the National Financial Policy. An auxiliary agrees to provide all applicable contact information, including a current mailing address for all auxiliary correspondence to national and respective department, if applicable. An auxiliary agrees to prepare and file all required state registration statements and filing for the state in which they operate. Each state has its own submission timelines and documents, which are outlined by the state attorney general or other agencies in the state, and it is responsibility of the auxiliary to identify which filings must be completed along with the filing deadlines. In accordance with the auxiliary status in the Internal Revenue Code tax exempt organization, the auxiliary may not participate in or contribute to any political campaign, nor it may not engage in any activities to either support or oppose a candidate for political office. They must operate in the same fiscal year, September 1 to August 31st. Each year for compliance, they must submit the exact same thing that the departments and the chapters are, which are the new officer roster with an updated affiliation agreement signature page, corporation annual report, employer identification number report, financial reports, profit and loss statement, balance sheets, copies of fiscal year-end bank statements for all accounts, and bank signers verification, proof of IRS filing or a copy of the extension filed with, which must be approved by the National 4th VP. proof of state filings required for nonprofits as applicable, receipt for payment of the annual VAVS obligation, and updated auxiliary information for the national website. The parties agree that upon disbandment of the organization, its assets, after settlement of all liabilities, shall be transferred to the department if such an entity exists, and if it does not, it must be transferred to the national. The auxiliary must file their 990 final report with the IRS and any state required documents to close out the auxiliary. Now, under 7, assets and liabilities. The parties acknowledge that National maintains the responsibility for protecting the corporation's name, the reputation, and the 501c3 IRC tax-exempt status. Because of this, National has the right to require a financial audit of any department, chapter, or auxiliary if the circumstances warrant. Departments, chapters, and/or auxiliaries expressly agree to participate in such an audit of their records and to make whatever records are necessary available to National for this purpose. Refusal to submit the requested is grounds for disbandment. Let's talk about intellectual property. All corporation intellectual property is and shall remain at all times the exclusive property of the corporation. Intellectual property shall be overseen by national departments, chapters, auxiliaries may use the intellectual property if and only if such use is made pursuant to the terms and conditions of a limited and revocable license in accordance with the corporation's governing documents. Any failure by a department, chapter, or auxiliary to comply with the terms and conditions stated in Section 8, whether willful or negligent, may result in immediate suspension, disbandment of the department, chapter, or national. A chapter, department, or auxiliary may not alter the official corporation logo in any way. That means color, design, adding, deleting. It must not be altered. Intellectual property must be used by a chapter, department, or auxiliary in a professional manner and solely for the official department, chapter, auxiliary use. A department, chapter, or auxiliary shall not permit a third party to use the intellectual property without prior national approval. In any authorized use by the chapter, department, or auxiliary of the intellectual property, the department, chapter, or auxiliary shall assure that the applicable trademark and copyright notices are used in accordance with the terms and conditions of the limited revocable license. Now, every chapter, department, or auxiliary is required to renew this agreement on an annual basis by submitting the required documentation. If a department, chapter, or auxiliary fails to submit the required documentation, the actions described below shall be taken. Suspension or revocation of the charter. The charter granted by National to a department, chapter shall remain in full effect and force until all annual renewal paperwork is due. Following the date of this agreement, unless and otherwise revoked or suspended by National, are surrendered by the department or chapter in accordance with the provision of the agreement. Now, suspension. National, acting through the National Executive Board, may suspend a department or chapter's charter or that of an auxiliary if a majority of the NEB, after an investigation, determines that the chapter, department, or auxiliary is not in compliance with this agreement and the governing document. National agrees to provide the said chapter, department, or auxiliary with a notice of suspension within 15 days of the NEB's decision to suspend the department, chapter, or auxiliary. The notice of suspension will include a clear description as to the actions that were taken and what must be done by that entity to remove the suspension. A department or chapter's charter is subject to suspension if they have not submitted required annual renewal documentation by November 1st. The same is true of an auxiliary. National, acting through the NEB, shall have the authority to revoke the charter of a department or chapter for consistent failure to adhere to this agreement. Just as it had the power to grant that chapter, it may revoke it. This shall occur after a department or chapter has been placed on suspension and given reasonable time to remedy the situation and remove the suspension. Any decision by the NEB to revoke a department or chapter's charter shall be initiated by sending notice to that chapter or department, specifying the grounds for revocation and giving them a final chance to remedy the situation, and shall declare a specific deadline for such remedy. In the event that the NEB determines in its sole discretion that the chapter or department has failed to correct this condition listed in this petition, then the NEB will notify the chapter or department in writing within 15 days of the NEB's decision to revoke the charter, and shall inform the department or chapter of the effective date of the revocation. An auxiliary's charter may also be revoked if they have failed to correct the condition listed in any notice of suspension to said auxiliary. Disbandment. The procedures for disbanding a chapter, department, or auxiliary are contained in the national bylaws and must be followed for any department, chapter, or auxiliary to disband. The department, chapter, or auxiliary must file a final 990 with the IRS before they are approved to disband. All of their assets, including the balance of all bank accounts on the department level, must be transferred to national. Under the provision of this section, all chapters' assets, including the balance of all bank accounts, must be transferred to the department if an entity such as that exists. If not, then those assets revert back to the national organization. Under the provisions of this section, all auxiliary bank accounts would also be transferred back to national, with the exception of any state Big Dipper auxiliary, and these would be returned to the national Big Dipper auxiliary. If such assets are not transferred to the applicable governing body within 30 days of the date of revocation of the charter or disbandment, a late reminder will be sent to the president of that chapter, department, or auxiliary. If such assets are not transferred to the applicable governing body within 60 days of the revocation or disbandment date, then the national president shall call said department, chapter, auxiliary president as a final reminder. If such assets are still not transferred to the applicable governing bodies within 90 days of the revocation of disbandment, then the National Executive Board will take all necessary legal steps to ensure that the chapter, department, auxiliary assets are transferred in compliance with our national governing documents. Conflict resolution. The parties agree that any disputes arising out of or relating to the interpretation of this agreement or provision thereof shall by either party be submitted to binding arbitration in accordance with the District of Columbia laws, and would be conducted within the District of Columbia. The parties agree that binding arbitration is the final resolution, and the law governing this agreement is vested in the District of Columbia. This entire agreement represents the agreement between the chapters, departments, and auxiliaries, superseding all prior negotiations, correspondence, understandings, or agreement, if any, between said parties. All governing documents shall be read consistently with this agreement, and to the extent any provisions conflict and amongst governing documents this agreement can be modified by the convention body, but until such it remains in effect. Now, the individuals signing below represent and warrant they have read and understand the agreement and are duly authorized to execute and deliver this agreement, and that it is binding upon the terms. Please, in conclusion, never sign just the last page. I want you each year, before you sign your name as an officer of a department, a chapter of auxiliary, I want you to read this document in its entirety and understand the provisions thereof as to why this agreement is important and how it establishes such things as compliance and charters being issued and charters being revoked. I hope you found this information helpful.